people will say, "The Lord Almighty is God over Israel, and the house of your servant David will be established in your sight." Lord Almighty, God of Israel, you have revealed this to your servant, saying, "I will build a house for you." So your servant has found courage to pray this prayer to you. Sovereign Lord, you are God. Your covenant is trustworthy, and you have promised these good things to your servant. Now be pleased to bless the house of your servant, that it may continue forever in your sight. For you, Sovereign Lord, have spoken, and with your blessing, the house of your servant will be blessed forever. So I mentioned to you that this chapter just hits different. And certainly if you ever have just read through 2 Samuel, even if you've been reading along with us, you'll notice the same. It's action, 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 story, 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 interaction, interaction, interaction. And all of a sudden you have this break in the action for these conversations, for these speeches. And of course, one of them, especially noteworthy, is divine speech. Within the story of Samuel, 1st and 2nd Samuel, this is the first time that God has spoken this many words since he actually revealed himself to Samuel early on in the boy's life. He says even more here than there. Matter of fact, this is the most God has said as recorded in Scripture since Sinai, since he revealed his law to Moses for Israel. 2 Samuel 7 is no small deal when it comes to the story of God's purpose. A covenant is an agreement between two people. It's an official set of promises that define a relationship, often between one who's in a stronger position and one who's in a weaker. And so you see the signs of that in here, and you also see a number of allusions in here to the covenant that God had made with Abraham. So God promised that Abraham would have a great name. Same thing here. God promised that Abraham would have a place for his family. Same thing here. God promised that Abraham would experience, those that blessed him would be blessed, those that cursed him would be cursed. Same thing here, freedom from the wicked people. And so you have these various allusions that tell us that something covenantal is happening here. And it might be beneficial for us in understanding this passage within this session about the concept of covenant and how we see it broadly and also here. The Old Testament really is ordered by a series of covenants. You may be familiar with them. The first time the word is used is actually in connection with Noah. After the great flood in Genesis 6 through 9, God makes a covenant with Noah, which is really a covenant with the whole world. And he says that I promise you that I will never again destroy the earth with a flood. And this promise is made official in this covenant. Then from there you have a covenant that God makes with Abraham. He calls Abraham in the book of Genesis, calls him in chapter 12, and then it becomes kind of a covenant ceremony in chapter 15, and then the covenant is confirmed with circumcision in chapter 17. And once again, God is establishing an official relationship with Abraham and his descendants. And he says, I'm going to give you a name, I'm going to give you a huge family, and I'm going to give you a place, and through your family all nations will be blessed. That's a covenant. So from there, you actually move forward to the covenant that God made with Moses. Really, it was the covenant he made with the people of Israel through Moses, but Moses was the central mediator in the conversation between God and Israel. And this is when Abraham's descendants had found themselves enslaved to Egypt for many centuries, and then God came and delivered them through the leader Moses, and he made a covenant with them in the wilderness, and he gave them these laws to follow and to learn how to worship and to learn how to manifest his goodness. And he said to them, you're my people forever, and I'm gonna bless you if you obey this, and if you disobey this, then you're going to experience the cursing. You're going to experience curses. I'm going to discipline you as my children. And so you have the covenant with Noah and the covenant with Abraham and the covenant with Moses. And then you have the covenant made here with David. And just to round it out, later on you'll hear about a new covenant, specifically in places like Jeremiah 31 that point forward. And so that's kind of the framework of the covenants that you have in the Old Testament scriptures. Of course, we're looking at the Davidic one, but there's a broader picture here. And if I could just make a couple of general observations about what we see when we look at these. On the one hand, what we notice is that this is really indeed about God's redemptive relationship with the world. Is forming a real relation to these people and those they represent, and it's a relationship. From then on, you have these sort of more specific covenants with the line of Abraham, which becomes the people of Israel, which becomes the kingdom of David, and so on through the prophets. One of the characteristics that's similar about them that is maybe relevant to point out is the fact that oftentimes you have God working through one in order to bless the many. And so, even the very fact that there are individuals who are central to these various covenants, and yet it wasn't just Abraham, it was Abraham's family. It wasn't just Noah, it was all people. It wasn't just Moses, it was Israel. It wasn't just David, it was David's sons and the kingdom as a whole. And so, you have this dynamic where God is speaking to one representative who, in some way, brings about good things for all of them. And so those are just some general observations, and I don't want to throw too much at you, but if I could, what I'd maybe like to do is to draw together some of the key themes. Not so much like random, here's some things to think about, but more so like what actually are the primary characteristics of the covenant. And I want to present to you a few of those. One of them is the promised blessing. Some type of promise to do some type of good to them. Of course, once again, though, these promises aren't random, and so we'll use a big theological word. We also would want to talk about God's providential purpose in this. Now, providence is a word that refers to God organizing the story of the world, ordering history to bring about his ends. And my point here is that God's blessing is indeed personal towards those to whom it comes, but it also is designed to serve this plan where he doesn't just want to bless Noah, but the world. Doesn't just want to bless Abraham or Moses or David, but the world. And so there's this sense in which it's designing to serve this larger story. Another thing that I think is critical to remember when you think about the covenants is that it's not just some detached thing that God is establishing. And it's not this like contract that he's setting out and staying away from a distance. No, this whole thing is really has quite a bit to do with his personal presence. You see that especially in the tabernacle and now the temple stories that will emerge from David's line, that God is dwelling among these people, and that really continues to be central. He is their God, and he is up close, and he is available to them. And even as you see these things, you can already start to see where this is going. Of course, you guys know where the new covenant is pointing, and really these are all characteristics of Jesus. And what we recognize when we pay attention to this is there's really this like cyclical symbolism. And Jesus helps us understand the characteristics of the Old Testament covenants. And of course, we could talk all day about how they shine light on who he is. But for now, we'll kind of keep our eyes focused on what we specifically learn from the covenant with David. And what I'd like to point out in that regard is a fourth characteristic of these covenants that I think is forefronted here. And that is the priority of grace. That is the fact that this relationship that God is establishing with his people, man, it really begins with God reaching out for us. And you may know this, but I don't know that you ever graduate from this idea of grace. I don't know that you ever get to a point where you no longer need to be reminded that God is the one that takes the first step toward us. You know, think about it in relationship to what we've noticed, even in the immediate context of 2 Samuel. We talked in the last session a lot about the central importance of obedience. And obedience is important, and obedience is central. And there really is no way in which you can continue to receive and experience God's blessing if you're continuing to live in disobedience. Like, this is obviously an important thing for us to keep in mind. But obedience is not first. The most important thing about you is not what you do for God, but it's what God has already done for you. I think that that's even some of the 1-2 that you see in this story. David's like, I want to build you a house. And God's like, whoa, don't think that I need you to help me out. To make things very clear, here's how this relationship works. I'm the one who has everything, and I do good things for you. The first step in a relationship with God is not to obey, to get to work. No. But the first step in a relationship with God is to receive. Look at what David did. How did he respond when God spoke to him through the prophet Nathan? What did he actually do? Hey, in light of Samuel 7, what we need instead is don't just do something, sit there.
Dot will testify that when I begin our life group conversations, the way I begin our life group conversations, because we're always reflecting on, what we've participated in our worship time and in the sermon and whatever. So what I always ask my life group to, before we even get into any conversation, is there anything that anyone would like to reflect on from what they just heard? Don't I say that, Dot?
Yeah.
The answer is yes. So, anything that Billy would say, anything that jumps out at you, I'll just put it in different words.
I think you can see that God is always wanting to bless humanity, and a lot of time it's through individual people. But as you mentioned, the covenants weren't just for that person that he was making it with; it was for the intention of blessing many more.
Yeah.
So God is always wanting to bless, multitudes of people of everyone, pretty much.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. We talked about this chapter being a pivotal chapter in God's on the covenant. And of course, Sean, you hit it right on the head earlier on when we were talking about relationship, and what does God tell us about what it means to be in relationship with Him? And that's where we get to the word. Wow. Where's my Bible? Oh, it's still playing.
Ben,
Yep.
I wonder if we could, if it's wise and biblically sound to kind of extend what he said about that all of these people were blessed, but they were essentially the conduit for the blessing for all of the people, all of his people, and even like for Abram,
Mm-hmm.
the stars in the sky, not just his family.
Yeah.
And should we view his blessings that come from his covenant with us as something that we're the conduit through which this goes to those around of us?
Mm.
And that his love and his grace
Yeah.
flows not into me, certainly into me, but, to those that are in my family,
Yeah.
in my circle of friends,
Mm-hmm.
those at work, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So it's not something to be just, all of those guys allowed that to happen. Maybe I need to make sure that that's happening in my life.
Yeah. So, to that point, Rod, I'll read just a few verses from Jeremiah 31, where Jeremiah is prophesying of the new covenant, right? So listen to the language here. The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel and with the people of Judah. It will not be like the covenant I made with their ancestors when I took them by the hand to lead them out of Egypt, because they broke my covenant, though I was a husband to them. This is the covenant I will make with the people of Israel after that time, declares the Lord. I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. No longer will they teach their neighbor or say to one another, know the Lord, because they will all know me from east to west. For I will forgive their wickedness and remember their sins no more. He who appoints the sun and shine by day, decrees, stirs up this idea, only if the heavens above can be measured. It talks about the glory of God, but this idea that I will be living in their hearts, You know, my dwelling place is now, you know, not going to be in a temple or a tabernacle. It's going to be within their hearts, and they are going to be my people. I will be their God. To your point, recently, who had just received this amazing blessing from God. I mean, it was a blessing that came from God, and I told this person that this is a blessing that you are receiving because of God's goodness. And they said, I just want to be a follower. I want to give myself into more of His service. I want to be, you know, I want to be a faithful follower. And it goes to what Michael said here. It starts with understanding how to receive God's goodness and to acknowledge His goodness, and then God. And Michael's line there, maybe it's just time to sit and you know, Michael made this observation, but when it says in verse 18, it says, then King David, after God had told him all these blessings that He was going to bring down on him, what He had in store for David and his future kingdom, David went completely humble. So, you know, who am I, Lord? Who am I? You're the greatest. All this to do. So, the priority of grace. So, I think it's interesting that David, at the beginning of the chapter, he goes to Nathan and he says, you know, and as you remember from last week, you know, we talked about the Ark of the Covenant returning to Jerusalem and what happened to Uzzah. We were troubled by that. So now David is reflecting on that. Well, we've got the Ark of the Covenant. We need to build a big house for it now. Good idea. But then the Lord comes back to Nathan and says, you know, I don't need a big house. I've got everything I need anyway. Go and tell my servant David, this is what the Lord says. Are you the one to build me a house to dwell in? I have not dwelt in a house from the day I brought the Israelites up out of Egypt to this day. I've been moving from place to place, so the tent is my dwelling. Wherever I have moved with all the Israelites, did I ever say to anyone, here's how it's going to be. I took you from the pasture, from tending the flock, appointing you ruler over my people. I've been with you wherever you have gone, and we've approach his presence before God, even as a child, right? You know, he recognized God's blessing over him. He gave God the praise for whatever blessing that he had. You know, he was the one that when nobody else wanted to fight the giant, right? He's like, you know, who are you people? I've got this God. We don't need to be afraid of him. We've got God. And so that was David's character from the beginning. And God honored that. I've been with you wherever you've gone, and I've cut off all your enemies from before you. Now I will make your name great, like the names of the greatest men on earth, and I will provide a place for my people Israel, and I will plant them so that they can have a home of their own and no longer be disturbed. You know, wicked people, I will also give you the rest from all your enemies. So I'm gonna continue to bless you. Lord himself will establish a house for you. This is what the covenant, like the agreement. This is what I'm going to do. When your days are over,